So I love those Instagram accounts that show people restoring abandoned wood furniture, the kind of pieces that get left on the bulk pickup for garbage day, infested with termites and completely forgotten. These artisans aren't making something new. They're uncovering the original beauty that was always there, hidden under years of damage. So this story in Mark, oddly enough, reminded me of why I love those reels. Because both reflect the wild work of grace, which reveals the deeper truth that we are already whole and worth restoring. This Lent, we've been journeying through the stories of transformation where God meets people in the middle of the mess and begins to write something new. But today's story, it's a little unsettling and strange. A man is out of his mind, living among the tombs, cut off from himself and his community and any sense of peace, until Jesus restores him and sends him out with a story worth telling. Unlike the other stories we've explored so far, this one reminds us that transformation is rarely neat and easy. Healing almost always brings disruption and resistance. But there in the chaos, God meets us and begins the sacred work of making us whole, and then sends us out with the truth of what grace has done. So let's just take a quick, close look, because I think this wild, piggy story has something to teach us about the process of real transformation. And here's the first thing to notice. Transformation disrupts what we have learned to manage. If we're honest, sometimes it's easier to manage our pain than to imagine living without it. We adapt, we accommodate, and we build whole lives around what hurts, as long as it's predictable. We don't just manage situations, we manage emotions, expectations, relationships, even the silence that holds what we can't say. And we become experts at holding it all together. And when grace begins to move in us, it shakes loose the very systems that we have learned to survive. The man among the tombs wasn't just suffering, he had become part of a system that everyone had learned to manage. Did you notice the detail in that story? No one could restrain him anymore, not even with a chain. He had often been restrained with shackles and chains, but the chains were wrenched apart and the shackles he broke to pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. The arrangement might have been miserable, but it was stable. No one expected anything to change. What if the things that you have been managing aren't meant to be managed anymore? Because Jesus arrives and he dismantles the whole setup. Suddenly, the man is clothed and in his right mind, and he's no longer the one that they can chain up or write off. And I think sometimes that's the hardest part of healing. Realizing just how much we've gotten used to what hurts. Family systems expert Harriet Lerner writes, "We repeat what we don't repair." And repair often begins with one person who decides not to play their part in the old system anymore. But here's the thing. Transformation doesn't just disrupt what we've learned to manage. It also asks us to let go of what we have depended on. Most of us simply learn to survive and integrate what is broken. Why? I think because we know that real healing will come with a cost. And that's the second point. Transformation is almost always resisted because it costs us something. Comfort, predictability, relationships, roles, or identity that we have developed really well and cultivated carefully. Which brings us to those pigs. When Jesus casts the demons out of the man, he sends them into that herd of pigs. We're told 2,000 of them. Possessed, they run off the hillside, down an embankment and into the sea to drown. 2,000 pigs. That's a fortune in the ancient world. I'm going to guess it's still a fortune. The townspeople weren't outraged about the demons. They were upset about the economic loss. This is more than just a symbolic moment. It's a devastating economic reality. That herd represented security and livelihood and stability, and it's gone in a flash. It's dramatic, it's unsettling, and it's expensive. They aren't celebrating, they're afraid. That's why they ask Jesus to leave. Sometimes we want healing, but only if it doesn't disrupt too much. We want new life, but not if it's going to cost us what's familiar. What pigs are we holding on to that might hinder our transformation? For years, in fact, up until he died, I studied with systemic change expert Rabbi Edwin Friedman. And he offered something that I will never forget. No one, he said, has ever gone through a profound transformation without first feeling like they were being made to suffer. That's why slaveholders were always more terrified of freeing their slaves than the slaves were of being freed. That's not easy to hear, but it's a great reminder that we don't just fear change. We fear the loss of what the change might take from us. And that fear runs deep. So deep that I think it reshaped the way we think about faith itself. What have we been taught our whole lives? If something really matters, we have to work for it, we have to push through it, we have to earn it. And that leads us to trust in a transactional faith. If I do this, then God will do that. But transformational faith asks something different. It asks for our willingness, not our perfection, not our hustle, just our trust. Spiritual psychiatrist Gerald May says it beautifully. Many of us have been dutifully trained to be willful, to push through, to soldier on, to take charge, to make things happen. But willfulness is not the same as graceful willingness. And graceful willingness is where transformation takes place. Look, I love a self-help book as much as the next person. I read them all. But transformation is not self-help. It is Christ's work within us for the sake of the world. We can't grow and can't heal without giving up some measure of that control that we are so used to. Freedom will always cost us something. It costs us the roles we've learned to play, the stories we've told to keep ourselves safe, the comfort of knowing what to expect, even when what we expect is pain. Could it be that part of what makes change so hard is that understanding of what it's going to cost? The good news is grace doesn't leave us in that fear. it frees us for something more, which is point 3. Transformation doesn't end with you. It sends you out. Go home to your people and tell them what the Lord has done for you. The man, now clothed and in his right mind, he wants to stay with Jesus. Sure he does. But Jesus doesn't let him. He sends him out, not as a preacher, not even as a disciple, just as a regular guy with a story to tell about how love and grace and mercy changed him. Because healing isn't a one and done event. Transformation is slow and sacred work from the inside out. It reshapes the way we live every day. And it sends us out for the sake of the world that God so deeply loves. As we like to say here at Westside, it's transformed people who transform people. And here's the part of the story that really always gets me. The man never actually asked Jesus to heal him. He runs toward Jesus, but not with clarity or confidence. He's frightened and he's confused. It's like his soul is torn. He wants to be free, but he's also terrified of that freedom. And I think most of us know that feeling. We want to change, but we're still not sure. When a certain way of surviving has become your companion for so long, even grace feels like a threat. But still, Jesus sees him, and he moves towards him, because that's what grace does. And this tells us a powerful truth. Transformation doesn't wait for us to get it all together. It begins in the mess. Not as a reward for our efforts, but as a gift that we didn't even know how to ask for. Grace sees what we can't fix and moves towards us anyway. And then when grace restores us, it entrusts us with that new story. Our lives begin to speak, telling the story of who God is before we even ask. That God who meets us in our tombs, who sends us back into the world as living, breathing signs of resurrection. So let me conclude with this. A reminder. Transformation doesn't begin when we've got it all together. It meets us where we are. It disrupts what we've learned to manage. It costs us the comfort of the roles we've come to depend on, and it restores what has been buried beneath years of veneer, sending us out into the world with a story to tell. So may we leave here today, not trying harder, not managing more, but loosening our grip and trusting that the one who sees what's real beneath that veneer is already at work within us, restoring, healing, and sending. Thanks be to God. And now it is my absolute delight to introduce Beth, who has a story to tell.
When the invitation came to me to speak today, I said, sure, I can do that. But when it came time to write down what I wanted to say, I couldn't get started. I didn't have the words. I got in touch with Pastor Liz and asked her to send me the scripture reading. I read about the craziness of that man's life. And then I read the end of the story. That is my story. I'm like the man who was beset by demons and who came to be in his right mind. My demon is anxiety. I have been fighting with it for years. I just could not get a handle on it. But like that man, I had encounters that brought me to my right mind. My struggles with my anxious thoughts took the joy out of many occasions. I would fret over upcoming holiday family gatherings to the point that I would call my mother and say, "Mom, I just can't come." I would focus on my certainty that the happiness of everyone around me was my responsibility, and I wasn't doing my job. I would fret over how to get around in an unfamiliar city, certain that I was the only one who should know, even though there were two of us traveling together. Living in the moment was hard, except in times of caring for others, in my nursing and paralegal jobs, and in women's groups or retreats. I would do small things to make situations easier for clients or to support fellow members of a small group. I would quietly take care of a patient, a client, or a friend while people were in a panic around us. I was my mother's advocate when she had to make difficult choices at the end of her life. In those times, I knew my contemplative center was valuable and useful. Outside of those sorts of situations, though, I still fought against all the frets and worries that inhabited my soul. Over the past several years, as I opened myself more to the communities I have been a part of, I began to really listen to what others had to say, in particular to what they had done to combat their own anxiety. One of these people was a West Sider who shared a story that touched me. Her message was, anxiety is not me. It is a part of me to be managed as if it were asthma or a bum knee. Another person spoke of inviting her anxiety in and getting to know it. I had always fought to keep mine away. Early in the pandemic, when I, along with a lot of the world, was experiencing greater than normal anxiety, I named mine George. I took him for a walk and I left him in a tree. I'm still surprised at how effective that was. He's still in that tree. I said hi to him yesterday when I took my apprehension about making this speech for a walk. At that point, I was no longer ashamed of my anxious self, no longer fighting that self. A little over a year ago, two things happened that changed my perspective again. One was in a West Side spiritual direction group. One day, I talked about having an anxiety disorder, but also having the ability to be calm and present. The woman across the room from me looked at me intently and said, "Maybe the calm, peaceful part is the real you." I was stunned. What if that were true? Then, a month or so later, in a plane on the way to Aruba, I was reading the magazine from the seat pocket. There was an interview with a singer who started out singing in church as a child and ended up on Broadway and beyond. She talked about the influence her faith and her friends have had on her life. She replied to one question by saying, "I believe that people see something in me that I don't see in myself." When I read those words, I felt goosebumps. Maybe the calm, peaceful part is the real you. My inner world shifted. What if I trusted that other people saw the real me? As I pondered these things, I realized that my focus on my anxious self had given it a needed validity, but now it was time to change. Like the man running around the tombstones, I had come into my right mind. I was not suddenly a new person. Nothing outward had changed, but in changing my focus, I felt like a brand new me, a calm, steady person with anxiety issues, instead of an anxious person with a calm center. I saw my true self. I made a vow and I wrote it down to nurture my calm, steady nature. I am enjoying that journey. The anxiety comes, of course, but it does not derail. The contemplative practices that I am building into my days are keeping me centered and in my right mind, and I am grateful.